April 10th, 1996, Principles of the Infinite Way, 11th class. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. This is like the second to the last class we're going to have. Next week we'll do a class that's on the principles, but there won't be any new material there. We will essentially just take from these previous 11 weeks the principles that we've discussed and list them all out and talk about them. So next week will sort of be like a review. Tonight we're going to discuss the nature of healing, which is very much like the nature of supply, and once again it's essentially a review of the nature of mind, which is really what this whole class has been about, I think. Like in everything else, there's three levels of healing. There's material healing, and there's metaphysical healing, and there's spiritual healing. Material healing is what doctors do, and metaphysical healing is using the mind, using principles of mind power to heal. And the purpose of both material and metaphysical healing is to heal. There's a problem out there that needs to be healed, and the purpose of both of these levels of healing is to heal the problem, to fix the problem. The purpose of spiritual healing cannot be to heal, because the first principle of spiritual healing is that there is nothing to heal. The purpose of spiritual healing is the realization of God, which is exactly the same as the purpose of working on spiritual supply or meditation or anything. Spiritual healing is one more recognition of the existence of God. The goal, rather than the purpose, I should say the goal of material and metaphysical healing is to heal something. The goal of spiritual healing is to achieve conscious union with God, realization of God. And that's the only thing we do. And the practice of spiritual healing is the practice of achieving conscious recognition of the presence of God. The reason I think that Joel, he did so much healing because he was a healer, but he stressed healing very much amongst his students. And there's two reasons that I can think of. One I know for sure. I don't know. The lesser of the two reasons is it's a good carrot, and I don't know for sure that he would have come from that position or not, but certainly healing is a good carrot to bring students to class. People come to a spiritual practitioner and receive healings, and if you receive a healing through somebody else's consciousness and you don't maintain that conscious elevation yourself, you will need a healing again, and this can only go on so long. So it certainly is a wonderful carrot. But much more important, it is the demonstration that the principles that we've been studying for the past 10 weeks are true. And it's the only demonstration. This is, it's the only proof. This is all theory. Except insofar as you have a conscious union with God, you are aware of, you recognize your oneness with God, you have the mystical experience, and you demonstrate supply, and you demonstrate healing. Those three things are proof that you have in fact embraced the principles of the infinite way. Now, we've discussed before that higher people don't heal, and it's true that the infinite way teaching is not an absolute teaching, and there are teachers at an absolute level of consciousness, and if you truly are coming from the absolute level of absolute teaching that there is nothing to heal, then you don't heal. So people like Robert and Rajneesh don't heal. But those who are here to provide a service to the souls that are struggling, the bodhisattva type spiritual consciousnesses, need to work in the 3D world, because the problem is that the absolute teaching is available to very few. Many can hear it, but the great many will not gain anything from an absolute teaching, and in fact they will either walk away from it because of the apparent foolishness of it, since the absolute teaching, since truth really is irrational, or they will accept certain points of it and make some terrible mistakes. So a relative teaching like Joel taught is more humane, certainly is more human. In any event, that's the purpose. That's one of the purposes of healing. Like supply, it's the demonstration of the principles. Joel talks about healing as happening in 3 steps. The first step is to impersonalize. And impersonalization is impersonalization of the claim. The word claim is used. Somebody comes to you and makes a claim. They claim that they have this disease or this problem or this lack. Healing is applied to lack of supply. Healing is applied to lack of finances. Healing is applied to lack of moral integrity. Anything at all can be, any sort of lack can be dealt with by a healing consciousness as easily as lack of health. The first thing that needs to be done is to impersonalize, or nothingize, and that really means to, first is impersonalize, and that really means to forget the client and forget the problem. Seems like a strange way to start healing, but the fact is that the recognition is that the claim does not lie within the client. We don't have a situation of an error within the client. We have a situation of a belief in world mind that through ignorance the client has permitted to enter into his or her consciousness. So the metaphysical teachings, Christian Science, all those teachings at some point or another would go into the person and try to find the error in their thinking. The lust equated to cancer and greed equated to this and that. They would go inside the person and try to discover what it was that person was doing that was manifesting as the disease, because they knew that mind manifested disease. But their teaching was that it was the person, the claimant, who was the problem. And Joel's teaching, the infinite way teaching, is that that's not true. The problem is the universal human belief in these things, which has been coming into the particular human mind through failing to keep it out. This happens, as we discussed in the nature of error, this happens just through existing in human consciousness and not doing protective work. So the problem is not in the client, and the client is not in any way causing the problem or producing the problem or manifesting the problem. The client is, through ignorance, allowing that lie to be within his consciousness, and that's what the mind is manifesting. So that's what he's talking about when he says impersonal eyes. The next step is he calls nothing eyes. And that is, now that we know that the client is not responsible for this and we can forget the client, we're now dealing with an appearance that is produced by world mind, let's say, as good a name for it as anything. And now we remember that world mind has no power, has no reality, has no law. There's nothing in world mind that can sustain this truth, this appearance. So and we remember that the appearance is just hypnosis. It's no more real than my favorite white poodle, the hypnotized person's white poodle. The appearance that we're dealing with has no more reality than the white poodle. And there's no more power to maintain it than there is a power to maintain that white poodle. All that needs to happen is the hypnotized person know that he or she is hypnotized and there is no white poodle. And that's the second step in spiritual healing, is recognizing the absolute non-reality of the appearance and the fact that there's no power sustaining it. This is all powerless. This is just agreement. It's just human consciousness agreeing on this, and the fact that we're all agreeing on the fact that there's a flu epidemic is the reality. The only reality of the flu epidemic in all the flu cases is that we all agree there's a flu epidemic. If nobody believed in flu, there would be no flu. So the second stage is nothingizing it. And the real purpose of these two stages is, what we're really doing is we're reminding our own intellect, or retraining our own intellect, or beginning to try to rise out of our intellect so that we can get to the final stage of spiritual healing, which is communion with God. Yes, Diane?
I have a question. If you said none of us believed that there was a flu, there wouldn't be, okay? And it's probably because we've been conditioned that during certain months there's a flu epidemic that comes around, and so people start believing that. How does something like AIDS get started? Is it just like somebody, so it just comes into somebody? I mean, I don't get how something new then gets manifested if it's never been there before. And
well, I don't have a direct answer from that, but the answer that comes to me is that people who believe in disease will manifest disease. And as some diseases get removed, cured by materia medica, people still believe in disease and still manifest disease. So now there is a disease, and if doctors go looking for a new virus, they will find it, because in fact, the looking for a new virus, the decision by the doctors, well, there must be something causing this, is sufficient belief in it to manifest it, since it has no reality. So it all works the other way. It's all inside out. Believing is seeing. This is even true if you read that book on the holographic universe. This is really true in subatomic particles. You know, design your experiment and observe the subatomic particle perform to agree with your experiment. Design two mutually exclusive experiments and observe the particle cater to both of them in turn. So it doesn't require any reality. It's just a human agreement. Another example that Joel uses is that people used to catch colds from sitting in drafts. And people used to sit in drafts and catch colds, or get damp feet and catch colds. They did that for years and years and years and years. And then some medical science discovered that there was a cold germ or a cold virus, and that sitting in drafts and having wet feet can't cause colds. And at that time, it stopped happening. But prior to that, people who sat in drafts with wet feet had caught colds. Now, they don't relate, but nonetheless, it was true because of the belief. So what people are looking for, they will find. And when AIDS is cured, there will be another one. And when that is cured, there will be another one, because it's in the consciousness. And that's what we're doing here. It's also, this is a spiritual gymnasium, and that's a great thing to grow with. In any event, the purpose of these practices is to flip that other light switch.
I have a quick question. Mine may have a quick answer.
Thank you.
If there is one with a healing consciousness in the midst of a human belief, in other words, if someone contracted with having or being in the human consciousness, contracted AIDS, and then became aware of the principles that it really internalized those principles and became lifted spiritually, would they be absolved of that?
Yes. Joel did that all the time. And Herb Fitch, one of Joel's students, has actually had HIV negative people that were exhibiting the symptoms of AIDS. Or HIV positive, I guess, is when you have it, turn out to be HIV negative after Herb did the work. No trace that there was ever any such disease. A miraculous healing. That's the point. That's exactly what we should expect with a sufficiently high consciousness. That is the demonstration. That's what Jesus did all the time. He wandered around the Sea of Galilee over there, gathering crowds. Raising the dead is to be taken literally.
Does the Jesus is harmonious?
Because the nature of God is harmonious, not because disease is harmonious. There is no disease. Because a spiritual being, which is what we all in fact are, can't be diseased. Because a spiritual being is individualization of God. The root is there. It's not that we only have harmonious diseases or we only have harmoniousness in this world. It is as we elevate our consciousness and know more truth, the world more reflects the reality, although it continues to appear to us as long as we're wearing a body and using our five senses to have these material aspects about it.
Can I ask one more thing while we're on this right now?
Go for it.
Okay. If you're in a group of people who are consciously believing in the disease, and let's say you're elevated, like you're at Goldsmith too, does that cut down on your power of making that happen? I'll give a little example. Remember when my friend got cancer, and I told you that when she got it, everybody was there with the cancer stuff, and it was almost like the whole community bought into her cancer. And I felt so powerless at that point, trying to practice what you just told me, that she doesn't have cancer because there isn't any cancer. But I'm not high at all. But if a Goldsmith was there in a group that all believed, would that be more difficult? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and if you have the clarity and you're sitting in the consciousness, then this is noise. If you're trying to attain the consciousness, then it may be murkier around you. If you're in the consciousness, Jesus would not have been impressed with that at all.
But if you're trying to get
he would have said nonsense. The fact is, and to the extent that you're doing your protective work or just remembering while you're there that this is nonsense, you're not going to be affected by it. If you're trying to do healing, you're not going to be sitting in that crowd. You're doing the work. You're going to be at home alone, trying to attain consciousness. That is not the place that I would attempt to attain consciousness of the non-existence of cancer, although I'm certain Joel would have done so effortlessly, and probably Margaret and Barbara and lots of people who
Okay. So it depends on your level.
Your strength. It's a muscle. Just a muscle.
Barbara relates a story about going to a dinner show in Vegas or something, and a hypnotist was performing, and she was just having her dinner, and the hypnotist was unable to hypnotize anyone in the room, and so she all of a sudden become aware that she's messing up his act, so she left, and she wasn't even necessarily trying to block that. It's just that's what she related.
Bummer.
Yeah.
Yeah, she knew it was all hypnosis. She knew the hypnotist was hypnosis, and therefore he was powerless. I mean, it's real simple. How can he have any power over her? He was part of the hypnosis. There's no such thing as that power. In any event, the idea is to achieve a level of consciousness where we're in communion with God, and Joel calls it communion. So it's impersonalized, nothing eyes, and then arrive at the state of communion. And Joel, you'll hear him often on his tapes refer to, he would get quiet and wait for the click. And the click is the descent of the Spirit on you, or it feels differently to different people. Margaret says that she never felt the click at all. She has no idea what he's talking about when he says click, but she has a feeling too that she recognizes. And what he really says is, to him it's the conscious knowledge that God is on the field. And once you know that God's on the field, you turn it over to God and you go on about your business. But his technique for healing was to elevate his consciousness and sit quietly until he had that sense that God was on the field. And if it didn't happen, then he would go back to it an hour later and do it again, and he would do it again, and he would do it again. And again, it was a muscle. It's a muscle that's built. At the end of his career, he was at such an elevated consciousness that he didn't have to do any of the work. He was always there, and people were getting healings when they wrote letters to him before he got the letter. They would reach out and contact the consciousness and get the healing. There's a story, though, that Margaret was telling us gives you a sense of the developing of the muscle. He had, early on in his Christian Science days, there was a series of cancer claims that came to him. He had 5 people claiming cancer, and he just worked and worked and worked, and he resolved one, and then he worked and worked and worked and resolved the second one, and then finally the third one went, and finally the fourth one went, and then the fifth one just hung on and hung on and hung on. And one day he's in his office, and this woman walks in, and he says, essentially, how can I help you? And she says, I have 72 cancers. And Joel looks at her and says, I've been trying for months to heal one cancer, and you have 72 cancers. He says, lady, if God gave you 72 cancers, they have to be good. And he laughed about it. And in 3 days, she and his 5th case were resolved. And his muscle was up because he'd seen the ludicrousness of the 72 cancers, and obviously this is not of God. And so he had the resolution there.
He almost got a sense of humor about it, right?
Yeah. Well, she tells
lightened up on it.
Yeah. Margaret tells this wonderful story about this woman, this very high practitioner who was called to a bedside, and here's this terribly decrepit-looking sick man. They're all waiting for him to go. And this woman had an experience just before that, and she was just real clear that everybody was God. And so she's looking at this man, and she's having great difficulty not breaking out in laughter, thinking how silly it is that God can look like this. And she's sitting there trying to contain her laughter, and a smile starts appearing on the guy's face. And a couple of minutes later, he opens his eyes and smiles at her, and a couple of minutes later, he starts laughing, and she starts laughing out loud with him. And a couple of minutes later, he says, you suppose I can get up? She says, I suppose you could. And that was the resolution of that. I mean, she just saw at the very bottom of her soul how ludicrous it was that we could think that God looked like that. That's a healing consciousness. It's so clear that she could sit there and look at this incredible appearance with laughter, thinking how silly it is that God would wear a costume like this. What a silly Halloween mask. That's a healing consciousness. That's total clarity, and that's what yields instantaneous healing. And that's the kind of consciousness that Jesus had. He just absolutely knew the ludicrousness of these claims. Some thoughts on communion. These are just collected. I once again, in the process of the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've been listening to a lot of tapes on healing from Joel and from Margaret and various places, and I've collected statements that gave me different aspects on what this consciousness is. We're just talking about the realization of God from the viewpoint of a healing consciousness, but one is it's the recognition that there is no cause for any erroneous condition except hypnotism. When you recognize this fact, that's the end of the treatment. When you recognize it, and by recognize it I mean know it in the sense of the 4D knowing. And the fact is that when you recognize it in the sense of 4D knowing, then that truth bypasses the intellect, impacts the mind, and the manifestation changes. It's a mind thing again. Joel says what he does is he gets to that point and he goes into the attitude of, "Speak, Lord, your servant is listening." And that's the frame of mind that he recommended, or the frame of consciousness that he recommended sitting in after you have done whatever. The treatment is, when Joel or them talk about treatment, what they're talking about is not treating the problem. The treatment is the work on their own consciousness. They're treating their own consciousness, elevating their consciousness to the point that they can be quiet and wait for that click, that realization. So the treatment is the elevation of, is trying to elevate your own consciousness to where you know the truth. And Joel worked until he got to a place where he could sit quietly and wait for the word of God, or wait for the click, or listening. So the point is that you raise yourself until you're clear and have nothing else to say, and then you sit quietly and wait for the presence, or wait for the click, or wait for the words, or wait for whatever it is. The consciousness is prevented, of course, by wanting God to do something. If you go into this communion in order to ask God to heal, you've lost. Because the healing consciousness is that there's nothing to heal, nothing for God to do. God is already doing everything that God does. The problem is illusion due to a confused consciousness. God cannot do anything. God does not cause, and God does not cure disease. God has nothing to do with it. And he says, to the extent that the practitioner simply realizes the three omnis, omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence, and does not try to heal, or enrich, or employ, healing happens. If you don't have any intent to change anything, but are simply sitting there recognizing the nature of God, the healing happens. The healing agency is not God, it is your illumined consciousness. It is an illumined consciousness, your illumined consciousness. And again, if you think you have to do something, you've already lost. The battle is history. There's nothing to do. And as soon as you recognize the Christ, it's done. So once again, these are just different ways of saying, go for the click. We have to rise to that impersonal level. And the point of not thinking that I'm the one that has to do something. I have to rise to that impersonal level where there is no I, Lee, to do anything. As long as there's a Lee, we're in deep trouble, because Lee can't do anything. And Lee is the one who sees something to be done, and never the claimant. I mean, the problem is with me. I see this error. It's me that has to be healed. And as long as I, small I, is there, we're not yet in the healing consciousness. It's the I am that has to be recognized. So the healing is impersonal. It is impersonal in the sense this is a statement that puzzled me quite a bit until it clarified for me the other night. God is we are individualized God. We are individualized God consciousness. And it always said impersonal. And I always thought of impersonal meaning is not separate or something. But the reality of all of us is an impersonal individualization of God consciousness. And the thing to be recognized is this juxtaposition of impersonal and individualization. Impersonal means no personality, no 3D sense. Individualization, Barbara, who's such a wonderful person with words, points out, individual means undivided. So it's a oneness within the oneness, so to speak. But it's part of the oneness. It's not divided separately. It's part of the oneness, and yet it has a focus to it. It's not reasonable, of course, to the intellect, but there is a focus to it within the one consciousness. So the point of that is that we have to rise to the impersonal sense of self, where we know that we are that individual consciousness, that one consciousness, and we know that we are that I am, and then it happens. This is not, by the way, stuff that is not achievable. I mean, people are looking at me now like eyes are crossing or something, and this is all a perfectly reasonable thing for everyone in this room to expect to be doing. This is not fantasy land. This is not unrealistic. This is a very, very reasonable thing for us to work on attaining. Nobody would be in this class learning, hearing about spiritual healing if they were not ready to begin practicing these principles. And in fact, that's what we're being asked to do by being in this class. I mean, that's what always happens when you show up in a class like this, is having heard the truth, you will be presented with the opportunity. The healing, it can be looked at as standing on principles. I mean, what we've been doing is we've spent now 11 weeks, and we're going to spend one more week, 12 weeks, learning the principles of the infinite way. And if you stand on the principles of the infinite way, that is a healing consciousness. If you work at realizing the principles of the infinite way, you will have a healing consciousness. The two are one. There's no separation. So practicing the principles is attaining this healing consciousness, and it's something that can be done. Margaret talks about sort of a different level of healing consciousness. Instead of going through the impersonalization and the nothingisation and working on your consciousness with God and getting quiet and doing all of that, if you are maintaining the consciousness of who you are, and if you are maintaining the consciousness that there is only one, then whenever a claim is presented to you, it is immediately nonsense. Somebody says, I have cancer. And I say, I am a spiritual being. I don't have cancer. And that's the healing. I, the one I, the I that you are, the only I there is, cannot have cancer. And if I know that, that is the healing. And that is the state that Margaret and some of her practitioners heal from. And that is the state that, in fact, Joel healed from. Joel always knew that he did not, that he could not be sick, and anyone's consciousness that reached out and touched his knew that too. And that is the level of consciousness which can heal a person that writes a letter before the letter gets there.
I believe that you believe this.
Yes.
I believe that you absolutely believe that.
Mm-hmm.
Can you go into with someone that appears to be very ill and heal them?
I personally have not had that experience. I know other people
Then
that
why
have.
not? Because I really believe that you believe that, without a doubt.
I don't know the answer to that, but I don't seem to be able to do spiritual supply for people either. I have solved supply and have solved disease and things like that with myself. You know, I don't get sick and I don't have supply problems, but I don't know the answer as to why I don't do healing work.
Well, we want you to. That's what we're saying.
That will be an impediment.
I know.
To your own training. That's one of the things I'll ask Aunt Margaret about when I'm there. In the back of my head, I want to say, that, my guru and my second guru were both absolute teachers. And there was no healing in their consciousness, and they are, in fact, my gurus. And so that may be it, or that may be a cop-out. The fact may be that I just don't understand this accepting principle. I mean, I may have the words and not have the truth, and I expect to talk to Margaret about that in a couple of weeks.
But
other people do heal. I mean, I know it works. I have seen her pitch. I saw a lady who came to class in a wheelchair from Johannesburg walk away. I mean, she'd been in that wheelchair for 8 years. And
But I've healed from your consciousness.
True.
I believe it's from yours, not mine.
To some extent. I mean, I certainly don't have, that may be true, and there are some other cases that may or may not be true. And we had a little thing about supply one time that may or may not have related to that, but,
I don't know. I had some shiatsu and ended up healed. It was a long road, but
Is this what happened?
I think you did have a healing at the hospital. There was way too much coincidence for them to, finding that heart problem and everything when they're looking at your brain and such like, or vice versa.
well, I had that stroke like 5 days after the shiatsu.
Yeah, there was stuff going on there, but Dulcie was very much, and Dulcie heals much more than I do. Dulcie has very clear results. There's no question about that. And, my sense is that I'm a teacher. I teach. People hear what I say. People come hang out with me and change, I teach. And I don't seem to heal. The people who hang out with me don't get well or get rich unless they get taught enough that they can get well and get rich. But I don't know. That's one of the things I want to talk to Margaret about. And I got a letter from her yesterday or today, and I have an appointment with her. So I'm all set to... And it's her last appointment, so it'll take a while. So I'm going to ask her these things and find out what she says.
Is this what happens when one alcoholic talks to another?
Yes. That's an elevation of consciousness. To recognize the hypnosis of, we don't call it that, but we're all accepting the power, our powerlessness over alcohol. We're really accepting powerlessness, but the fact is that the consciousness in Alcoholics Anonymous is that alcohol has no power. And the people that come into into that consciousness and stay there get elevated. And they get elevated long enough, and they get elevated long enough to stop drinking. And they go away and they start drinking because it's not their consciousness, it's the group consciousness, because they don't understand the principles yet. Okay? That's why you have to do the steps. And that's why you have to keep going to AA until you're clear. But when I was in India for 6 months, and it never crossed my mind to look for an AA meeting. Because I was at the feet of my guru. It wasn't an issue. I was doing spiritual work. It never crossed my mind to drink, and there was alcohol there, and there was drugs readily available. And I have no idea, I assume in a town of 2 million people there was probably an AA meeting, but it was irrelevant. Because I was in the consciousness. Now, another thing is that the client is involved. First of all, the fact that you have a healing consciousness will not just heal everybody that comes within 20 feet of you or 20 yards of you or whatever. The people that wrote Joel letters got healings, the ones that didn't write the letters didn't. And the fact is that there was a conscious reaching out on the part of the client which connected them to the consciousness of the teacher. Do you see that? Back to the one mind thing, and you are primarily responsible for your body. Although I have a second say about that. I mean, you create your body. Your consciousness is manifesting your body. And to a much lesser extent, I'm doing modifications on that in the sense that everybody here will see you differently. But we'll all agree essentially on what we see, but we'll see you differently. Everybody will see you differently because of their own consciousness. But the fact is that the client is the consciousness that has allowed this error into their consciousness, and they are in that sense manifesting it, although they certainly are not responsible for it. It's not some flaw in their mind or something. It's just that they are accepting universal hypnotism. Now that client is the one that needs to be elevated to get rid of the disease. So the process to some extent is you tell me I got the cancer or I see it because you're manifesting it so clearly. I go inside and work on myself so that I don't see it. In doing so, I elevate you so that you don't see it. So the fact is that the client is in fact being elevated, and that's involved and it's necessary to some extent at least. The client has to be to some extent willing. They have to be reaching out for it in some sense. They don't have to be consciously knowing that they're reaching out to a spiritual healing, but they have to be receptive to it in some extent. And the receptivity of the client is significant. And the flip side of that is that if the client is clinging to the disease for some reason, they're dependent on it or need it or something like that, then it may not be possible to heal them, or they may continually remanifest it just as, a day or a week or a month later. If you're doing the disease for some reason, then you need to clear up that reason yourself, or work on that problem. So those things are relevant. The client can hold the problem in his mind and maintain it. And Margaret says, or maybe, no, Joel said, in that case, you can inquire what the patient thinks the problem is. And something within them may reveal what it is they're clinging to, and you may be able to do some work that way, but the healing itself, just as an abstract healing, may not work. Joel's healing rate was 80 to 90%. He was not 100% successful.
Excuse me, Lee. By not being 100% successful, I mean it can be the client who's not receptive.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Joel was 100% capable.
Right.
But he had an 80 to 90% healing, quote, success rate. And of course, staying with the disease may also be success, because that may be what's optimal for the person's spiritual growth. But on a basis of how many people got relieved of the symptoms that they came to him with, that he solved 80 to 90% of them. And this is on the order, on an average of over 130 a day, and in his early Christian Science days, often 300 clients a day. So it's real. Joe had an incredible number of healings.
For the healing to happen, like, does the having reached out for help just isn't enough, or
the client does not have to be able to elevate himself to a fourth dimensional consciousness or anything like that, but the client has to be receptive enough that he has linked himself with the consciousness of the practitioner. And in that case it will happen. And often it will happen even though they haven't spontaneously reached out to the practitioner. I know of a case where a guy was reading, listening. I mean, he got the message about Joel tapes and he heard some Joel tapes, and then he wrote to Peoria and he ordered all the Infinite Way tapes, all 585 of them, and sat down and went through these tapes. And he went over to UCLA or St. John's, I guess it was. One day he was called over to help with somebody and the whole ward was healed. Everybody in the ward became cancer free. So that sort of thing can happen. But it's equally possible that one of them could have stayed with cancer. If he was by God going to have cancer this lifetime, he could have maintained it. In a healing, a client has been lifted through his connection to the practitioner. And when the healing is complete, he may fall back to his previous consciousness. Will fall back almost to his previous consciousness if he doesn't begin to do some spiritual work himself. Now, after many healings, the practitioner may lose the ability to heal that particular client. It's not possible to keep coming to a client, to a practitioner with everything you have forever and expect to get healing. Joel comments that if that were possible, then obviously all the rich people would have all the practitioners, working for them full time. And I heard Margaret say on one of her tapes that there's a built-in safety factor here, and she didn't say anything about the mechanism, but in 2 or 3 different contexts she refers to this built-in safety factor. And of course, what it's doing is it's the nature of it apparently to throw the client back on his own resources in order that he develop spiritually, which is what this gymnasium is all about. As a result of doing the healings and of being healed and not learning to do your work to yourself, your addiction to humanhood may be increased. And that's
Could you say that again?
I said, as a result of being healed a lot by a practitioner and not doing the work in your own consciousness, your addiction to humanhood may increase. You may start taking pleasure in the disease and the healings and start really thinking this is a wonderful game, and this is the reason for the built-in safety factor.
By you talking about this and what Steve said before, it makes so much sense why AA works for certain people and doesn't for others.
Yes.
I mean, it's so clear to me now.
Yes.
Why some people can stay sober and others can't. It's like the same. It's like a mini cosmo of what you're talking about right here.
And it's just a wonderful. It's a much lower level thing, but that is what we're talking about. We're talking about elevating people spiritually to a level in which they realize the powerlessness of alcohol. None of it's conscious. None of it's happening consciously at all. The practitioner don't know the principles, and the clients don't know the principles, and it's working just fine because everybody there knows it works.
And then, though, after a certain length of time, if you don't take over yourself and do the steps and do the stuff,
you go out
fall
again.
back to your same
You go out again.
level of consciousness.
At 7 years or 15 or 23 or whatever.
If you haven't done the work, when you get to that place where the group consciousness can't carry you anymore.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
If you do 1 year of sobriety 25 times, you're probably going to drink. That's probably the best thing for you spiritually.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to finish this tonight. An important attitude in the practitioner is the attitude of dropping all concern. First of all, don't meet the problem at the level of the problem. We just have to recognize that the problem is a suggestion and relax completely in the treatment, knowing that the problem is nothing but a suggestion and there is no power and there is no reality. The point is, if you're concerned, you're already stacking the deck against yourself. The reason it's particularly difficult to heal yourself is because it's particularly difficult to drop all concern with yourself.
Especially when it hurts. Yeah.
Precisely.
The chapter I just read today, The Thunder of Silence, fits right into what this dropping all concern, the chapter The Father knows within. The Father knows. That chapter, it's The Thunder of Silence, is just so powerful in that sense of just dropping all that concern.
Right.
Because we don't have to be concerned about it.
There's nothing to be concerned about, and no one to be concerned. But the purpose is to achieve the consciousness where we know that. First we achieve the consciousness that there's nothing to be concerned about. Knowing that there's no one to be concerned is another level. Your success as a healer is determined by how quickly you do drop all concern. And I must admit that I do get caught up in wanting to help people. Definitely a weakness there. See, I have no concern about myself, plus I know that I'm not going to get sick or run out. I'm not worried about that. So I have no concern there. The next comment here is it's very difficult to heal yourself for these reasons. The secret is non-reaction, immediate non-reaction. And I have been recently training myself so that I meet every claim that's presented to me. I mean, that's not presented to me for healing, but that's just I see out there with nonsense. Barbara suggests finding one word which reminds you of all these principles, like hypnosis, or they used the word octopus in her class for a couple of years. They had a picture of this thing with 8 tentacles grasped onto your head, squirting ink into your eyes, okay? As they used the word octopus to remind themselves that what this hypnosis was, or the word hypnosis or mesmerism. And I just use nonsense. I like that because it is nonsense and it's also nonsensical, irrational. Although it's very rational if you're in the rationale. But the non-reaction and the quickness of the non-reaction are critical factors and need to be developed. And I've been using the word nonsense and developing myself, and it's just amazing during the morning meeting, which is a very high AA meeting. You know, the energy there is very good, and there's a lot of AA consciousness there, and a lot of good stuff is happening. And I probably say nonsense 10 times in the 45 minutes. You know, I mean, you hear 10 lies for every truth, and yet there's enough consciousness there to keep people sober for ridiculously long periods of time. Alright, if you think there's something to heal, it's you that needs the work. Go within and ask to have your consciousness cleared. And just ask to see the thing as it really is. Turn away from the appearance. One is, it's your consciousness you're working with. And so that's where the work has to be done. So the work is all done with you. And this is way back to the impersonal eyes and nothing eyes. It's not there, it's here. You know, I see it. Margaret was asked, what do we do when somebody, you know, if instead of somebody coming to us with a claim, they come to us and say that somebody else has a claim. You know, my friend has cancer, can you help her? And she says your reaction to that is, first of all, that it's gossip, but treat it as gossip. Now, I have no evidence of this. I can't be sick. She says just she treats it right there as I have no evidence of this. This is not happening. It's contrary to everything I know to be true, and I have no evidence of this. But the question there, of course, is whether that person wanted Margaret to be asked or wanted the practitioner to be asked. Was there any receptivity there? Joel's also very clear that we have no right to go around healing people that don't want to be healed. Just as people who are into spiritual healing get bent out of shape by people who keep wanting them to go to their doctor, so people who want to go to a doctor don't need to listen to us preaching to them about spiritual healing. Everybody has their own right to their own path. And essentially, he, I'm sure, would not accept claims from anybody except parents for children or people who are responsible for people who are not capable of asking for themselves. But other than that, each person is their own consciousness. And let me just...
Lee, could you repeat if you think there's something that needs to be healed, you need...
Healing.
Very...
It's you.
Yeah.
You need healing.
I just want to get the word.
Yes. All right, here are some miscellaneous comments that I liked but that didn't fall under any of the other areas. Most of them are from Joel. We are not grateful that someone is healed, because that's of the 3D world. We are just grateful for the 4D contact experience and the revelation of harmony. That's where he came from. Beware of doing good. The do-gooder mentality gets you enmeshed in humanhood. And then there are anecdotes galore about do-gooders. The practitioner cannot want to compete with doctors. We're not healers. We're states of consciousness, rising to knowledge of our identity. We're not changing sick into well, etc. We're revealing Christhood. When it comes forth, there is no sickness, no lack. Try to realize the nature of spiritual grace, spiritual being, spiritual harmony, spiritual body, and some answer will come forth. And then just to comment, light doesn't do anything to darkness. Darkness is the absence of light. Disease is the absence of God consciousness. Nothing need or can be done to it. We don't attack darkness, we turn on the light. Well, that's what I put together on this for this week.
Lee, I have only some of the outlines. Did you put out all of the outlines?
I will. I will make sure that everybody can have them all.
Thank you so much.
You know what? Some of them are combined too. I'm still, because I got confused over there.
And there's a folder over there on the table that has extras of some of them that I handed out. And anyone that you don't have, if you tell me about it, I will make sure you get one.
Is there 1 through 10?
Today is 8.
8. Okay, great.
And next week we will get number 9, which is just a list of principles.
Thank you.
To really use the spiritual muscle when you're going through any kind of 3D pain, you just quickly, like you say, think of a word or something. You don't have to sit and experience all of the, what I think is my karma and my pain. And could you realistically just think of a word and then just
You're starting at the most difficult end. Healing yourself is the hardest thing to do. I would start out by, I'm practicing that word at morning meetings.
I'm sorry?
I say I'm practicing using the word nonsense at morning meetings, where well conditioned to recognize the nonsense of what I'm hearing. And I'm just now itemizing it as such and meeting it head to head every morning. Starting with your own pain is the hardest place to start, because you have a history of believing in its reality, and so it's a harder elevation problem. It's easier to work with somebody else and get somebody else to give you a lift there. Although I noticed that, I always have something wrong with my body. And I've watched this for years, and I never do anything about it. I always use that as something that I can work on. And it's always such nonsense. I mean, I had an ankle that they told me would have to be operated on, and if I was operated on, I would then be off of it for 3 months, and then in rehabilitation for 3 months. And then the odds were 50-50 that it would be better than when we started. And that was the way to get my ankle back to where I could run. And so I didn't run for 2 years, and then one day I decided, it's just nonsense, and I went running. And there was no problem. And then a knee prevented me from sitting cross-legged in satsang very long. And so I watched that, and now I can sit in full lotus for a long time, and that went away. And then I developed another. I always have one problem. Now I've got a problem with my knee right here. I fell last October and bumped it. Okay? And it is still sore as we talk. It is still here. And, there is no damage you can do to a knee. Here, that you pop it, that, I mean, if there were nothing going on, there's nothing you could do that wouldn't heal in 5 or 6 months. So this is, I look at these as just something to keep my attention focused. And I'm really rather fond of that knee now. I drag out an extra pillow over at yoga so that when we do the child's pose, which is the only place it hurts there, that I don't have to. And I've got a little inflatable back pillow that I got from my back a couple of years ago, which no longer bothers me, but it's convenient to kneel on when I'm doing shiatsu. And, really what it does is it brings healing into my consciousness several times a day. And so I'm sort of fond of it now.
A reminder.
I would be less fond if it was painful. We're done with the recognition exercises, principles. We're done spending 1 week each on them. Obviously, they need to be kept foremost. I mean, they need to be kept current. What I would suggest we do is start back over. Now, take the first one and look at it now, not from a viewpoint of do I understand what it's saying, but look at it now from the viewpoint of do I recognize that? Is it part of me? And start working on them until they become part of you. Those are the steps into 4D consciousness. The difference between 3D consciousness and 4D consciousness is one of recognition. So that's what that's all about. And the purpose here was to get that going with you, but now go back to the first one and find out if you own it or not. We just up to now talked about how would my life be different if I really did believe that and such like. Now take them in and work on them. Take the first one and put it on your mirror and put it on your refrigerator and put it in your wallet and put it around and live with it until you own it, and then go to the second one. Now Barbara, I said in the first class that Barbara said we should do 4 meditations a day, along with our tape a day and our half hour of reading a day for serious students. And those meditations, we'll see if I can remember them. One is the awareness exercise, and we all know that, and I hope we're practicing on that because that's the way to develop the muscle to get into the silence. A second one is world work, which we discussed during the Nature of Error class. A third one is what she calls the cast your bread exercise. And the fourth one is sitting in the lap. And sitting in the lap is that state that you're in when you have, in fact, entered the silence. Practicing the awareness exercise leads to sitting in the lap.
What was the third one?
The third one is what she calls the cast your bread exercise. And this relates to the, I thought Christian, but it's not really even Christian. It's older than Christian. It's back in one of the Old Testament books. The principle of casting your bread on the water and it will return to you, multiplied 100-fold or whatever it is. Joel used that phrase, and Joel's students all refer to the cast your bread. But
Service?
Exercise.
Practicing service?
no, I will now tell you what the exercise is as Barbara practiced it. It's a meditation that she does, and I will paraphrase it and comment on it as we go. But the first stage is, and it's all I consciously, and the I always is the fourth dimensional I. I consciously enter the divine silence, my God's abiding place. And when you're experiencing the silence, the next step is I consciously draw from there my daily bread. Or I tend to think I consciously draw from there divine harmony, divine love, divine grace. And when you feel the beginning of the flow, the third step is, and I consciously, she says, cast that bread on the waters of my Christ. And that to me doesn't have a lot of meaning. But after this class, what would make sense to us and mean the same thing is, and I consciously let that divine love, divine grace, and divine harmony impact my mind. And the fourth stage is the recognition that it then goes out from here and performs its work of healing and teaching and comforting and nurturing and illuminating and changing. And then the final stage is, and then it comes back to me in the image and likeness of God. Okay, that's the cast your bread exercise. And what it's saying is, I consciously drop out of my intellect, open the channel to God, let the fourth dimensional consciousness hit my mind, and my mind now creates a picture that more reflects the reality of God, which my intellect now can see as the image and likeness of God, or more the image of likeness of God, okay? So that is an exercise that she recommends that her students do daily. And I do play with that one also, because that's also the healing meditation and the supply meditation. What we're doing there is consciously establishing the channel and recognizing the flow that, in fact, is manifest as supply and healing and changing and illumination and all those things. So, play with that this week if you want to, and I'll be glad to give it to anybody again. I didn't have time to type it up. I'll be glad to give it to you after the class or tomorrow or whenever so that you can play with it. Yes?
I don't know if this is more of a personal thing to say to you at dinner, but I'll say it now anyway, make a fool of myself. I'm feeling so overwhelmed by all of the things that I have that I can do. I mean, it seems already I get up as early as I can, and I'm reading, listening to tapes, and doing writings, and then I should be doing, or not should be, I'll take that out. But here's another thing I can do, and I'm kind of getting confused on which of these things should I do, because I can't do all of this stuff every day. I don't have the hours unless I just don't sleep. Mm-hmm. And maybe this isn't supposed to do all these. Maybe I'm supposed to take the ones or start incorporating them, and maybe it does get easier then? It just seems like really a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
And you certainly can't step there in one step.
Okay.
What I'm doing as part of this class, I want as a result of this class for the principles to have been clearly said and heard, and I also want the tools to be available. Now, I know you're doing other work as well, and others are doing other work, and we can't do it all, and you need to work on those things which feel more relevant in the moment. And I'm just telling you, and Barbara was using that definition of a serious student as a needle. And it was real clear from the way it was presented that she didn't think any of her students would be serious students by that definition. And it's also real clear if you read Barbara's letters that she was much more serious than that.
The world work, I am trying a complete blank.
World work is, maybe we'll go back to that and I'll walk you through that. I don't think I want to give you a short, one-sentence answer. It was in the class on the nature of error, and what we're talking about is recognizing some world problem and taking into meditation the truth about that problem. For instance, the example I gave was when the Bosnia-Herzegovina thing was going on very early on. There was a group of people around the world that meditated every day at 12 noon somewhere. I think it was 2 o'clock our time. And we all realized that there was only one consciousness in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And by sufficient people recognizing that truth for that area, the hope was to elevate the leaders of those factions would get that subliminally brought into their consciousness rather than the stuff they were hearing. It's an attempt to elevate. Another time that it happened was the war in Saudi Arabia or Kuwait. There was a bunch of people that, led by a bunch of Joel students, that meditated about that for the month prior to that. And you notice that was the war that they didn't have. I mean, that war almost didn't happen. It was over so fast. That's world work. And there's some stuff about it back in that other outline on the tape. Well, let's get quiet for 4 or 5 minutes and see if anything comes up that's got left out.